Welcome out to part 2, where we're going to look at this thing. Rise of the Robots. If you don't know what it is, I'll fill you in. Rise of the Robots was the biggest, most hyped game of 1994. It was to change everything. This game was to sport a soundtrack by Brian May, formerly of Queen. It was supposed to sport an adaptive AI, which, if you don't know what that is, essentially the game would learn as you played it, so you need to constantly evolve your strategy. It was to have a rich, deep, compelling story, cutting-edge cutscenes, and more. However, what this game really was a terrible, horrible marketing tool. See, when this game came out, they hyped it to high hell and back. They were putting it on literally every console available at the time. I think there's like 12 to 14 different versions. There was going to be a movie, there was going to be comic books, there was going to be a TV show, there was going to be action figures. A novel was actually written to give this game a story, because there was actually very little given. However, Mirage and Acclaim, the people who were creating it and marketing it, focusing solely on selling all the external merchandise, and they didn't focus on actually making a game. That's kind of a problem, but let's get into it. Alright, so the plot is, at least what's given in the game. Essentially, a computer virus has infiltrated a security system in this high-ranking robotics conglomerate, and their giant super AI gets infected by it, thus infecting all the robots inside. So you play a cyborg who, by the virtue that you're part human, is unaffected by it, have to go in and defeat all the robots in order to have the company save face. Not much of a story, but it does kind of remind me a little bit of Killer Instincts, although that's a much better game. When you start out, there's no character selection. You are stuck as the blue cyborg. While not being able to select your character is a pain, and I think a massive detractor from any fighting game, it works from a storytelling perspective. You can frame all of what's happening around the cyborg, and the fact that he's the one doing all the ass-kicking, because he's the most powerful of them all. Supposedly, not actually functionally, but it works to a degree. Your cyborg goes in and takes part in 6 fights against varying opponents. When you start up a fight, you get this nice little CG cutscene, and it looks quite nice. It's a little low resolution, a little small, but it looks nice, and it definitely looks like there's been a lot of effort put into it. And then you get to the actual fighting, and you realize that the AI is completely brain dead. You can effectively win by simply kicking your opponent into the corner. Hell, some of them back into the corner themselves and just let you keep kicking them in there. That's the full level of gameplay and strategy to this game. Now, if you'll recall, I said that this game was to have an adaptive AI. In short, it learns as you play, and it gets better. That was completely untrue. In actuality, what this game does is they made every enemy, as you progressively go up the ladder and fight new opponents, your opponent will be more powerful than the last guy you fight. Technically speaking, only the first, maybe second opponents are actually weaker than you. After that, they start to outclass you. Every character after that actually has a greater range than your character. That's a problem. The third guy is the only guy who is actually a challenge, and not for any real legitimate reasons, but by the fact that he can hit you from 3/4 the screen away. His ability to hit you is about 4 times what your character can reach. Not only is that unbalanced, that's straight up broken. On top of that, once you start moving up the ladder, enemies do progressively more damage, and they have more health. So, while getting hit by the first or second guy might take 5-10% of your health off, getting hit by the 5th or 6th can take out 1/4, even half your health. Now, having a perfectly balanced game is actually not an optimal thing to do. You want to have your game to have a slight imbalance so that you're constantly evolving your strategy, planning how you can get the edge on your opponent. That's not something you can really do with only one selectable character, but not only is this game not balanced, it's completely unfair. And that said, they all have the same stupid-ass, brain-dead AI, where you can just kick them into the corner and they'll just sit there and take it. Now, because they have extra range, comparatively to you, their attacks also have slight priority over you. So you're also at a disadvantage in pretty much every respect after the first or second fight. The presentation is nice, and that's probably the last positive thing you'll hear me say about this game. But as I said, you've got these rather nice cutscenes that bookend each fight, which I would argue is sort of a reward to incentivize players to keep playing, because it's certainly not the gameplay. The aesthetic is very cold and metallic, but it works because you're a robot fighting other robots in a factory. The sprites are rough. Some of them, I can't even understand what's going on. Like, I look at that green guy or the blue guy, I don't understand what's going on with their sprites. It looks like various pieces are just sort of molding together because they share the same color and are jutting out of a similar place spatially. There's no depth to them. They just appear kind of flat, and because they're all the same color, it all just sort of meshes together in a confusing manner. The animation is lackluster. Every move has a total of 2, maybe 3 frames. So everything looks a little jumpy and doesn't look terribly smooth. It just sort of falls apart. Sound design is not good. Now, if you'll recall, it was to have a soundtrack composed and performed entirely by Brian May. That is a flat-out lie. Brian May did bugger all in this game. Now, I've been told that this is actually due to problems with his record label at the time, but essentially, all that was contributed was the first few opening chords of his song, The Dark, and that's the title screen. That's it. Everything else is just really bad generic techno. The sound effects are pretty underwhelming as well. I find it hard to believe that they thought this was a heavily marketable IP. I mean, you have one playable character and all the other characters are robots. Unlike something like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, you can't really invest in them because they're just scrap heaps. They don't have any personality, they don't have any quirks, aside from that green bastard. They have no emotion, they have no relatability. The fact that they thought that these characters would sell well enough to make action figures out of all of them and comic books and whatever, I find that really suspect. On the part of the marketing department anyway, because I don't really see any sort of connectability with the characters to any sort of audience. And there's no story to each character, because you only play as a cyborg, and what little story you get with him is not interesting, and he's not a relatable character. There's no actual character really presented. I assume that would probably be with the novels. But that didn't happen either. This makes the characterization of this entire game, the lack of characters, the lack of ability to play as the other characters, kind of meaningless. I mean, it was already a detractor that you couldn't play as them, but there's nothing there to actually make you want to, aside from the fact that they're slightly more broken than your character. The only replayability that comes from playing Rise of the Robots is after you beat the game, you get a code to play as the final boss in multiplayer. A system which in and of itself is fundamentally broken. On top of that, after you get the code, the game forces you to actually physically reset it, because they couldn't program an auto reset in, or to dump you to the main screen. That is just lazy and annoying. You can pick this game up on pretty much every system that was available at the time. I would advise against it, because it's not worth it. While I can't confirm this on my own, because this is the only copy I have on me, every other version seems to have some fundamental problem. I believe the Amiga version has 0 sound, and the Genesis version has both downgraded sprites, as well as a weaker soundtrack because it wasn't built with the Genesis hardware in mind. Ultimately, the existence of Rise of the Robots, back then and now, solely exists so that it can be pointed at and shown to anyone that if you're going to make a game to sell a brand, well, I wouldn't advise it in any way. If you're going to do that, make the game first. Make sure it's a good game. If you sell a brand before you sell the game, then the game has no guarantee of it being good. You have to make sure it's a quality product before you put it out, because if you don't, you're just going to flood the market with more crap. And if you overflood the market, it could be the great crash all over again. And no one wants that.